More on what was discussed and achieved at the UN Climate Ambition Summit. Let's speak with David Ryfisch. He's head of Division International Climate Policy at Germanwatch, and he joins us this morning from New York. David, the UN Sec-Gen Guterres, as we heard, said humanity has opened the gates of hell, referring to the extreme weather events brought on by climate change. What's the biggest hurdle to collective global unity in tackling the worsening crisis?
Good morning to Asia here from New York, first of all. There are three big challenges that I want to highlight. The first one is clearly that climate change at this point is affecting all of our levels of life. And so it is reflected in trade, in economics, and through that in geopolitics as well. So the divide that we see, especially between China and the West, is harmful to climate action, when actually what we need to win against the climate crisis is collaboration. The second thing is, even though renewable energy, batteries, etc., are clearly now economically beneficial, and also from a security standpoint, for example, there are still businesses and countries that are trying to give a lifeline to fossil fuels and are thus preventing unity against the climate crisis. And the third point, the third challenge is that especially developed countries have made many promises to developing countries in the past when it comes to ambition, when it comes to finance, and they have not upheld their promises, and that has caused trust to erode. And these three challenges are always causing us to delay unity in facing a climate crisis.
And the summit was billed as a no-nonsense forum where leaders announce specific actions that will deliver on their commitments under the Paris Climate Agreement. Did we get that?
Well, the UN Secretary General set out clear benchmarks for the first movers, first doers. And what we got from the summit is we got very clear signal that we are ending the time of fossil fuels, and it is the time for renewable energy, for energy efficiency. So we got a political direction of travel that we need. What we did not get, though, is new announcements, new initiatives, so hands-on signals that we are actually accelerating ambition. So it's really a mixed bag that we get out of this Climate Ambition Summit.
David, let's talk about the ocean. A first ever treaty protecting the international high seas has been signed by dozens of countries. Is this just a symbolic gesture, or would you consider it real progress?
Well, the oceans are instrumental to our Earth system, and it has to be protected, just like other environmental services that the Earth provides to us. The ocean has been, in many ways, been exploited and is being exploited, and we're risking of depleting our planetary boundaries, with the ocean being one of them. And as I said earlier, just like for the climate crisis, for the oceans, it's extremely important that countries collaborate.
And the UN Security Council summit dominated by the war in Ukraine. President Zelensky himself saying the conflict has to end so the world can focus on tackling climate change. David, how much has the crisis distracted wealthy nations from their climate goals, do you think?
Actually, all evidence shows that the Russian war on Ukraine has accelerated the energy transformation. So when countries say, well, we now have to go back to fossil fuels and we need fossil fuels for energy security, that is simply not true. Everything that we see is an accelerated energy transition. Renewables have become more beneficial as gas prices, oil prices have spiked globally. And the same holds true to the other technologies like battery storage, like technologies for hydrogen production. So actually, the energy transformation away from fossil fuels and to renewables has only been accelerated through the Russian war in Ukraine.
Yeah, perhaps that's an interesting unintended consequence. Moving on to the next question, I want to ask you about the absence of China and the US, the world's biggest polluters, that were not among the speakers at the summit. Won't their words and more so their actions move the needle most when it comes to addressing climate change?
Certainly, without the US and without China, it will be impossible to stay within 1.5 degrees. Nonetheless, the UN Secretary General set clear benchmarks on what countries have to show and to prove in order to be given the spotlight here in New York at the UN Climate Ambition Summit. And if we look at China, even though they're accelerating renewable energy generation, at the same time, they're building tremendous amounts of a coal power plant fleet that will cause simply the emissions peak that China needs to do as soon as possible to be delayed in the future. The US, on the other hand, have been, for the longest time historically, they have been the biggest emitter. And they have an obligation to support developing countries financially in the fight against climate change. And for a decade now, they have fallen short and they have not delivered climate finance to the degree that they have to. And these shortcomings that both China and the US are having are the reasons why we haven't seen them at the Climate Ambition Summit. Actually, also, they are in good company, unfortunately, with Japan and the UK, for example, where sadly, the UK that a couple of years ago was a leader in climate action, now under PM Rishi Sunak, is bringing back their climate ambition, which I believe will hurt them in terms of business opportunity and economic growth.
All right, we'll leave it there for now. Thanks very much for speaking to us today, David. David Ryfisch, Head of Division International Climate Policy at Germanwatch.